Good.
Our prayer and pledge this evening was from Miss Madeline Harris. Ms. Harris?
Thank you, Mayor. May we bow our heads, please? Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you just to say thank you, Lord, for the many blessings you have bestowed upon us that we don't deserve. Lord, we thank you for allowing us to live in a country where we have the freedoms that we have. We pray for the ones that are in the military that are fighting for us right now on foreign soils, that we can be safe and have our freedom. And Lord, we pray for the homeless. We pray for the sick, shut in, and the bereaved. And Lord, now as we prepare to take care of the business of the city, we ask that you move in the midst of us and have us to make wise choices. This is our prayer. We ask in your darling Son's name. Amen.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and good evening, and welcome to Murfreesboro City Council, February 7th, 2013. My, how time flies. I have a number of folks with us, and we're happy to have them, and always happy to have people visit with us and come to our council meetings. And we encourage you, if you're interested in the city and the city's business, to come and visit our council at any time. Also, I guess it's as good a time as any to say Happy Valentine's Day coming up to everyone, and at least warn the men in the room and warn the ladies in the room that that's coming up quickly, and be prepared, because there are consequences to decisions that are made or not made regarding Valentine's Day and any of the other holidays that we have.
Mayor, I understand some of those decisions are life and death.
Is that life and death?
Yes, sir.
Possibly are. Thank you, Mr. Young. So you've had fair warning. Council members, if you've had an opportunity to look at your consent agenda, it's before you at this time. If there are any questions regarding the consent agenda, now would be a good time to raise those questions. Are there any questions? If not, is there a motion to accept the consent agenda as it is presented?
So moved. Second.
Thank you, Mr. Gilley. Mr. Smotherman, please call the roll. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Gilley?
Aye.
Ms. Gels-Harris?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mayor Bragg?
Aye. At this time, you have the minutes of the January 31st, 2013 regular meeting before you. Any corrections, additions, or deletions to those minutes as they've been presented? If not, is there a motion?
Move for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Young.
Second.
Mr. Gilley, please call the roll. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Gilley?
Aye.
Ms. Gels-Harris?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mayor Bragg?
Aye. This time we'll consider for passage on third and final reading an ordinance to rezone an area located along Blackman Road and Pendleton Boulevard to a planned commercial development PCD district, single-family residential 15 RS15 district, and amend the remaining terms and provisions applicable to the remaining planned residential development PRD district.
Move for approval on third reading.
Second.
Motion and second. Please call the roll. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Gilley?
Aye.
Ms. Gels-Harris?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mayor Bragg?
Aye. Also on third reading, we'll consider for passage an ordinance to annex an area and consider a plan of services for the same located along Highway 231 North, Lebanon Highway at Cherry Lane, excuse me, to a commercial fringe CF district simultaneous with annexation.
Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Yes, Mr. Smotherman.
Earlier today, I had lunch with Mr. James Ridley, and he is the person who owns the property just adjacent to this property, owned by Jerry and Carol Lawson. Mr. Ridley's lived in his house, which is a very historical house, since 1960. The house was constructed in 1822. Confederate soldiers hid in the ceiling of this house during the Civil War. At that time, the house was owned by Dr. Black. Dr. Black was taken prisoner, carried downtown with the rest of the people who were in the attic, was rescued from being hanged by Nathan Bedford Forrest in his raid on Murfreesboro. The house was bought in 1960 by Mr. Ridley. Mr. Ridley's father received more distinguished service awards than Alvin York even. He received 2 distinguished service awards in World War I. He bought this house for him and his wife to live in and enjoy their marriage. They were married for 51 years. The home has been visited by James K. Polk. It's been visited by General George Patton. Mr. Ridley could not be here with us tonight because of medications that he's taken. He's been on the hospital for the last 2 readings. He's on oxygen, and he has burns on his feet, so it was not appropriate for him to be here tonight, although he really wanted to try and come. When you walk into the house, there's 14-foot ceilings, beautiful antiques everywhere. Mr. Ridley has served with his wife, Polly, for several years on the Oakland's board, at which he served president. Mr. Ridley's concern, I think, with the annexation that we're about to vote on is truly the concern of preserving the history. The doctor's office, Dr. Black's office, lies 3 feet away from this property that we're annexing here. I'm not sure what the future plans are, and I talked to Mr. Alsop this afternoon about the subject of what the plans were and what was going to take place, and I still don't know what the plans in the future of this property are. But I do know that we have to be very careful when we're dealing with history, because Dr. Black's office being 3 foot from this property line, there's the concern for not only the buffer, which I know they've made adjustments to what was expected of the buffer, but it's still the property, and the Alsops have a beautiful piece of property as well. But my concern is the ability to change an area with a zoning that would permit pretty much anything to go on that property. And I keep going back to the Oakland Mansion thinking, what if we took the baseball fields down over there and put a quick-sack on that corner? Would it change the environment at which you would feel when you went to the Oakland Mansion? And for me, I think it would. I think it would change the way I felt about it when I walked around that area. This afternoon, I walked around Mr. Ridley's yard and admired the beautiful scenery that he has out there. And I know in North Murfreesboro we're growing. Change is coming, and it's inevitable that something will happen as far as the development of that area completely. But we only get one chance to mess up history, I think, and I voted against this on the previous 2 readings, I guess, and I guess my concern is, I wanted to make everybody sure as to why I was voting against it. It's not that I'm opposed to the progress. I'm not opposed to the change, but in North Murfreesboro, we've had so much change, and there's so much commercial-type property that's available out there right now. It's not like there's a shortage of it. We've got plenty of signs up with people trying to sell their property and not seeming to have much success so far. I just think that this is something that could wait, and I even proposed the idea of postponing the 3rd reading of this to Mr. Alsop, and he said no, he'd rather go ahead and settle it tonight one way or the other. And but at some point you get to the point of respect and doing what's right. And I don't think there's ever a wrong time to do what's right. And so I'll be voting against this again tonight, and I certainly want the rest of the council members to take in consideration the circumstances and the conditions and what we're voting on here, because this is not just a zoning change that we're going to affect a piece of property that I think is something that we really, really need to be considerate of. It is registered with the state of Tennessee as a historical area, and I'll go ahead and be quiet and let us vote, and I appreciate you letting me speak.
Thank you, Mr. Smotherman.
Mr. Smotherman, Mr. Ridley's concern was with the zoning, but not the annexation of the property. Is that?
He's not opposed to the annexation of it by any means,
Okay.
but he is opposed to the zoning of it.
Okay, so-
And I don't know if they're kind of one and the same here on the first part, but I know the second part's really the part that concerns him the most, yes.
So this is, we're getting ready to vote on the annexation, and the next thing we're voting on, Mayor, item number 5, is the zoning, which Mr. Smotherman is talking about, right, Mr. Smotherman? And not the annexation, right?
Unless they're going to go one and the same, yes, but I'm of the impression that
There's a mistaken description on the agenda. Item 4 is simply the annexation,
Okay.
even though the words
Okay.
reference the zoning.
Right, okay.
Understandable confusion. I'm sorry for that.
Okay, so you're referencing number 5 then, right, Mr. Smotherman?
yes, I have no opposition to number 4, nor does Mr. Ridley.
Right, okay.
All right, you have this annexation requested by the officers before you at this time. Is there a motion?
I move we approve the annexation.
All right, you have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, we'll consider for passage on third and final reading an ordinance to zone an area located along Highway 231 North, Lebanon Highway at Cherry Lane, and it will be commercial fringe, CF.
Mayor, at the Planning Commission, to start this, the original request was for commercial highway. And the Planning Commission thought best that it be downgraded to a commercial fringe, which is in a lot of ways less commercial than the fringe zoning, the commercial highways from the fringe. Then the property owner made considerable concessions for setbacks and opportunities for the property to be less obtrusive to Mr. Ridley. Now, I don't know if we can be reminded of those from the applicant, of what they proposed tonight or not.
I expect Mr. Adelot could speak to that.
Okay. Should I ask him that? Mayor.
During the process, the applicants met with Mr. Ridley, and they agreed to place restrictive covenants on their property. I sat in on some of those meetings. I facilitated, but I made it clear that the city would never enforce those restrictions. We wanted to know about them, and we encouraged that they work together. One of the restrictions is a 75-foot buffer area around Mr. Ridley's property to the south of his line and to the west of his line to protect him. That's much greater than any buffer the city would require. Basically, it's a do not disturb, and that was in respect to the house and the medical office that's right on the property line. There are also some restrictions on the uses permitted. In addition to the commercial fringe zone, some of the uses that were permitted in the commercial highway, they cut out as excluded those types of uses as part of the restrictive covenants. I don't have a copy with me, so I can't read them verbatim, but those are two of the points that I remember that were most, I think, significant in the discussions.
Mr. McFarland.
Ms. McGann, this question would be for you. You know, over the years, I remember a time where we really stressed plan development. That was something that was very favorable with staff and with the Planning Commission and the Council. And as the economy changed, we had lots of developments and lots of commercial property that was zoned plan development. And so what we saw that people were were very locked in to what they had proposed. So then we've seen sort of a swing to go from planned development now more back, I don't like using the word bulk zoning, but more towards general zoning. But my question is, what we hear on planned development is it's too expensive. It is very definitive, but with that comes some assurances to the city as well as the homeowners. Is there not a way that we can make the planned development process less expensive, where we could say Mr. Alsop is saying they're going to record restrictions? Is there a way that we can say, okay, that's okay for a planned development, we're fine with these restrictions, that will be the planned development for this piece of property, here are the restrictions, it's a planned development to these restrictions?
I don't think staff has looked intensively at the degree to which we could decrease the planned development requirements to be zoned as a planned development. That's certainly something that we can do if the council is interested. Without, how much we could change it without really losing its capacity as a zone, because just what you said, that the person requesting the zoning change is committing to a particular plan. We have with very large plan developments sort of approved a master plan and said they've got to come back in phases for more detail for certain sections. We can certainly look at that. What a number of communities can do, as state law allows, is try and find that sweet spot in between by setting up for design review. You're allowed to do that now in Tennessee, and that may be something as well that the council would want staff to look at, so that there was something more than bulk zoning. And that is a technical term. It may sound odd, but it is a technical term as distinct from zoning for a particular plan. Those are currently the two alternatives, really, that we have. And modifying the requirement for what's necessary for plan development is certainly something we can look at. But oftentimes that's sought because adjacent owners are concerned about it, and you would not want it to be so loose that you would not, address their concerns.
Well, the reason I ask is we have an applicant who's making concessions to their application, and they're in agreement that these are the things that we're happy to put on our property to make a concession to the neighbors. But as a city and as a staff, we in turn are saying, well, that's great, we appreciate you guys doing that, but that's really between you guys. We can't enforce that. So I think the residents in turn are saying, okay, we have two willing parties who agree, I like this, they like that, but the city is saying, well, that's between you. So I just don't see how, as a city, we can't somehow be able to codify and say, okay, we have two willing parties, let's bring that together, and, okay, we can enforce that.
We can't do contract bulk zoning. That's clearly not lawful. That's why having a plan development where the city is approving the design, but it needs to have the same sort of elements as we have in bulk zoning in terms of what the setbacks are going to be, what the height is, what the uses are going to be. As I say, it's something we may be able to do something other than what we have done. We haven't been charged to look at it, and we haven't looked at it. But the element of trying to have something that would be enforceable to try and reflect something more than bulk zoning is generally met not by changing the standards for plan development, but by going to design review. And as I said, that's certainly something that the planning staff and legal staff can look at. But there wouldn't be anything I can think of where we would have the city in the business of enforcing restrictive covenants. That's just not going to be part of the recipe.
Unless it was some sort of a plan development that it may be a one sheet of paper plan development that said, here's what we agree to our development, this is our plan that we will agree by. But it would not be us enforcing restrictions.
Right. If that's certainly something we can look at to see how we could simplify the requirements for a planned development and see if it met the needs that the city had and that property owners throughout the city would have a reason to expect. When I see on the zoning map that something is zoned planned development, I can look and see what that development is going to be before I buy the property next door. If it was just, I'm going to build what I feel like building at the time, and you've given me a blank check, I don't think that would be a good thing for anybody.
Yeah, the reason we've had that I can remember on North Murfreesboro, we've had 3 developments that have come through that have gladly placed restrictive covenants on their property, and even in some instances deed restrictions. I believe that's correct.
Well, the restrictive covenants are a deed
Right.
restriction.
Okay. So I just wish there was some way that we could, to ease the residents' fear. You know, their thing is, 20 years from now, who knows who will have that property, and 20 years from now, the odds that we're all sitting up here, unless we have the last name Bratcher, that we may not be here. So I just wish there was some way that we could lessen the plan development where we don't have to see pictures, we don't have to see, the very complicated books that we've seen, but something that just says, on our plan development, here are the things that we're agreeing to. We're willing to stipulate that to the city that that's not going to change, and whether it be design guideline or whatever we call it. I would like to see staff look into that, and it may provide a way to get out of this sort of gray area that we're not enforcing restrictive covenants, but really we're pushing it back to the individual property owners to work it out amongst themselves.
Would state law give us standing in any type of enforcement?
Restrictive covenants are property owners, and the city could seek to get a property interest to allow it to be somebody who would be protected by the covenants, but having parcels of land all over the city for that purpose would not, I think, be a good idea. We can certainly look into it. We can try and structure it that we're a third-party beneficiary so that at least we could bring a declaratory judgment action, but that is untried. It's something that staff and I have talked about, but it doesn't seem that anybody else is doing it yet. So generally, it's through enforcement of the zoning ordinance that cities have the power to regulate what the development is. And having general standards or bulk zoning is one form of expectation where the landowner, the neighboring landowners, and the city all know what the standards are going to be, even though they're more general. Or having a very concrete thing which can allow for variability because you've got a large or a special circumstance. People have gone to planned developments because they wanted a more intense land use than the general standards allowed, and the city would support that because there was some offsetting amenity that was going to be done. So it's previously been, and generally under state law you sort of have 2 types of zoning. Whether or not we feel that we can reduce the complexity of planned development is something, as I say, staff can certainly look at. But having the kind of concern, as in this instance, about protecting adjacent properties from what may be injurious uses might also be something that would be done through design review. We can look at it. I just can't give you an answer that we can get it to a 1-page development.
Is there such a thing that would be a bulk zoning with amendments?
No, because then you've got spot zoning. Then you've got no. We could have a far greater number of bulk zones than we do. You've, I think, been on the council when we've changed zones. We've created new zones. We could create a lot more new zones that would be general to allow for more individual variation. That might be a possibility. You may recall we went to, Office General Medical in the area around the old hospital, and we were trying to allow some flexibility there. We've done special, we did zero lot lines, and then we went away from it. We've done bulk categories to address what we thought were particular needs in the community at the time. It may be that creation of one or more new bulk zoning categories would be a way to try and address what you're talking about. I think it would just call for some study that it hasn't received, because the planned development approach had been something that had the specificity that the council wanted before they were changing and allowing very dense developments. And the council wants to go in a different direction, staff will follow.
The part that I don't feel comfortable with, and luckily we have an applicant who is saying this is exactly what I will agree to, and the other neighbor saying that's great. But what I don't want it to turn into, and this is coming from someone who deals with this on a daily basis, so I feel like I understand the process, but we shouldn't have restrictive covenants to be that become the new standard. We've had planned developments, we've got bulk zoning. Well, now we're going to have bulk zoning with an applicant that says, oh, I know I'm asking for bulk zoning, but I'm putting restrictive covenants on it. When we have no assurance that those restrictive covenants could not be amended from the day that something's passed. Those restrictive covenants are the responsibility of the developer until, if it's a homeowners association, until that changes hands. So that's the thing I think the council needs to understand. Restrictive covenants, no matter what someone tells us, can be changed at any point that the applicant would like to do that. Now, I don't think it would be very smart on the applicant to do that and have to come back in front of the council, but restrictive covenants can be changed.
Well, it depends on the terms of the restrictive covenants, because they will specify who has the power to change them and when they can be changed. Some allow for them to be changed at any time, depending upon a vote of who the owner is. If the owners are still one person, it would be instant. Some say they can't be changed for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It really varies with the terms of the covenants, how much protection they really give. And I agree with you that I don't think that's the best response to a recurring problem.
But also, I think the significant difference between, say, the Haynes property or the Gerald property and this situation is, in every one of those situations, we created a RS area or a residential area or some kind of cushion between the commercial type property and the residential property. And in this case, we're just smacking it right there 3 feet away from his property, and it's a historical building, and the only thing protecting it is that covenant, and covenants can be changed. And I just think that if we were to look at this more logically, I think we would come up with a buffer that would be enforceable by the city to protect that property. And that's my point.
Mr. Gilley?
A couple things. Restrictive covenants actually can be recorded in such a way that they cannot ever be changed. They can run in perpetuity with the land. Is that correct, Ms. McGinn?
If the same owner, theoretically, yes. But if it's the same owner, I think that's suspect. I'm not aware of a case where one owner said it's going to be in perpetuity and that same owner sometime later wanted to change it, where there was total unity of title and they'd been challenged and their ability to change it had been overset.
But then, having said that, we're then back in the position of, we're saying this is something that we're encouraging but we can't require someone to do. It's great they're doing. We've had some developments come before us in the past listed as planned developments which have been too loose to be able to meet the requirements of that. And that's sort of where that discussion has ended with those, is saying this is too loose for this, either tighten it up if you wanted a planned development or look for bulk zoning that better meets your needs that the Planning Commission and this council would be comfortable with. With the approach that Shane is suggesting of coming up with, as you referred to it as a sweet spot, with the planned development that's looser than what we have guideline-wise, but still meets that criteria, how long do you think it would take for your staff and the planning staff to report back to us on that?
I'm not going to speak for Mr. Edelott and the planners. They're the professionals in the field.
And I think what we're really looking at, Joseph, if you could look back at the last several that we've had that have had restrictive covenants put in place of it being a planned development, if those types of things were what were incorporated into the planned development application as being the line that causes it to be a planned development, I think is what we're talking about.
Yes. And Mr. Edelott, you may have a better suggestion than even what we have discussed.
Because I'm not so sure that creating additional bulk zoning classifications is the answer, because otherwise you could end up with a bulk zoning classification for every situation that comes up. You could end up with 10 or 15 new bulk zoning regulations or categories, and I don't think that's the road we want to go down.
You're right.
This is obviously a very complicated issue, and it's not something that is easy to answer. In terms of a report, I would expect that we could probably get maybe a report of some of this maybe within, I'd like to say 2 months. And I'd like to say that because we are in the middle of budget time and we've got a lot of things going on. In terms of an amendment to the zone ordinance, I'd like to say probably 6 months, adding with the 2 months being part of it, because it takes about 120 days to go through a zoning process for the public hearings and all. This is a big and complicated issue, and I wouldn't want to bring something that's not properly fleshed out between planning and this legal department, because it's got to have a very firm legal basis when you undertake this. I do want to offer just a couple of real quick thoughts. I do believe that planned developments have a place in our zoning toolbox. Planned developments do, but I think in the past we may have misused them a little bit. Planned developments work best when it's a big development that can't meet the bulk requirements that are otherwise available, and where it's going to be somewhat of a landmark development. Something like we saw recently with the 3343 apartments, it was a good candidate for a couple of reasons. One, it was different. It couldn't meet the underlying zoning. It was an appropriate use. It is going to be a landmark. It had a very clear plan that the developer knew what they wanted to do and were prepared to do it. It was a good candidate for planned development zoning, and we recognized it from the beginning. Mr. Alsop, on the other hand, has not been a good candidate for planned development zoning as we know it today, because he does not know what he wants to do, but he is willing to make agreements on what he won't do. And it makes it where the planned development is not a good tool to apply to him today. And he knows he won't be the developer of it. He wants to find a buyer. And because of that, the next buyer will inevitably want to change whatever he puts into place if it's a planned development. But his approach with the restrictions, they will buy it subject to those restrictions, and they will be somewhat prepared to live with them if they buy it. Because in their due diligence, they would encounter them and find them. So that tool works a little bit for him in that. Design review does not fix it. We already have some amount of design review. We apply that every time the Planning Commission looks at a site plan. We can upgrade that, but that doesn't take care of the use problem. It can take care of some problems, but it doesn't take care of the use problem. And it complicates things. And it will change the way we do site plan review. And with our, right now, I'm a little hesitant to reach out and embrace that and say that's exactly where we need to be today, because I think the economy is still vulnerable. It's a little bit soft, and we'll look back probably in 2 years and say we're needing to be maybe more in that direction. But today we're still a little bit soft. So I would say give me 2 months. We'd come back with maybe a report, maybe some additional information. I will add one more thing. I read a book recently about zoning, and it was a very interesting book. And I would like to get a copy of that book for each one of you. If I could, I would buy it from my budget if Mr. Lyons would pay for it, because I will take it out of the planning budget and compromise some, because this book was a very eye-opening approach to the different types of tools of zoning, and it talks about the proper place for planned developments. It talks about the proper place for bulk zoning, and it talks about the other communities that have been in situations like Murfreesboro, where we had a very suburban ordinance and we became a growing community and need to make a change. And I think it'd be something that every one of us would benefit from. And I will and I'd talk to Ms. Lyons about getting a copy of it for you. It was a real eye-opener for me, and it was one of the best books on zoning that I have read in my career. You might find it dry, but I found it interesting.
Mr. Adelot will probably tell the council members, and I'm sure you've told the commission as well, that, as we see all of the planned developments that we approved several years ago, that I'm sure on a weekly basis you're dealing with planned developments where people are coming in and wanting to amend those planned developments, and sometimes even go from a planned development back to a bulk zoning. So I just think that this is something that we are going to continue to deal with for many years to come, and if we've got something in our toolbox that we can really not only protect the homeowners, but also find a win-win with the city and promoting, the economy, there's seems like there's a way that we could marry all three of those together. So I would like to say, or see if we could sort of head down that road to try to figure something out.
Yes, sir.
Mayor, there's one other thing that we don't know about that I don't. Maybe Eddie would know because he's had a conversation with Mr. Gentleman today. Is what are his intentions for that property? The owner.
What are Mr. Ridley's intention for his property?
Mm-hmm.
His property is registered with the state as a historical marker, and his intentions that I perceived from him is at some point that will probably become, he served on the board of the Oakland Mansion. I don't want to tell you he's going to donate it to the city or anything, but certainly I do have the impression that he wants it to be preserved as a historical marker from this point forward. And the thing that we recently experienced with once we changed the zoning and you leave it up to the individual as to, and I'm not saying it should be a planned development, I'm not sure, but if you leave it up to the individual, it turns into a case just like we had with the Walmart on Northfield Boulevard, that once you've zoned it, basically it's between the person who's selling the property and does it meet the minimum zone criteria. And I cringe at the thought of seeing something come in there that might disturb or destroy completely the historical significance of his property. And I think the potential's there.
Any other comments?
I apologize for turning this into such a long meeting that we thought would be a short one.
Good points.
But I think this is something that's very important. I think it's something that, I guess now that they've been annexed, they're citizens of Murfreesboro, but prior to this meeting, we weren't dealing with people who lived in Murfreesboro. We were dealing with people who lived in Rutherford County, and we certainly welcome them in. But but to have such a capacity or ability to control what happens in a neighborhood, this just seems to be pretty vague in what we're permitting to happen. And I hope we don't mess this up for historical significance. And in my conversation with Mr. Alsop today, I asked him, do you have anything planned for this property? If you do, be honest with me and tell me, because I do not want to destroy your deal that you have going through if you have something. And he said, I don't have anything involved. It may be 20 years before this property sells. It could sit there that long. And of course, my statement was, well, why don't we just delay it just a little bit? And he said, I'd rather end it now, tonight, and get it over with one way or the other. So that's where we're at.
And I think what makes this one different from the ones that have come before us that I can remember, it is on the historical registry, which is a little different. I don't know if we dealt with that before. We may have, I just don't remember.
Yeah, it's not just a neighborhood that we're talking about. It's a historical marker, and it some people would probably look at it and say it's an old house, and I know at one time the Oakland Mansion got almost to the point of being torn down. We almost tore our courthouse down one time too, because we felt like it would have been more advantageous to have more parking on the square. And I think in retrospect, when we look at it, the preservation of historical markers are very important. And sometimes you don't see it at the moment, but sometimes down the road when, it would be great if we still had the James K. Polk Hotel. But we can't undo what was done. And in this case, I just think this particular zoning is too risky.
Mr. Gilly?
Have the restrictive covenants been recorded? I know we have issues before we've asked, or while we can't make them do that, it's been suggested or volunteered they be recorded before third reading. That's our guarantee that they actually do get recorded. And can you allow him to address that as a representative of the applicant?
With the council's approval, Mr. Huddleston?
I don't know that we should allow a public hearing, and Mr. Huddleston,
he's just representative of Mr. Alston, whether they've been recorded.
I already asked that question.
But if we allow staff to speak, I think that's okay. But if we start opening it up to the public, and no disrespect intended, Mr. Huddleston, I just don't think, unless he's being brought up as an expert witness or something, I don't really see the significance of allowing the public to speak. And
I'm just curious as to whether they've been recorded yet or not. And if Mr. Aylock can answer that as opposed to Mr. Huddleston, that's fine too.
Hand them to Ms. McGann, and she can tell us whether they've been recorded or not.
Well, what I have before me is a copy of a Declaration of Covenants and Conditions and Restrictions, and they are recorded at Record Book 1193, page 3771. These have been properly stamped by the Registrar's Office and appear to be a recorded copy. And let's see. Want to show me something? Yeah. And with the most interesting condition in Article 4 of this, it says amendments. The declarants, their heirs, successors, and assigns, and James A. Ridley, Jr., his heirs and successors, shall have a right at any time to amend this declaration by written amendment. No consent of the owner shall be required. So Mr. Ridley can amend them, and not Mr. Awesome. And then it says the declarants, their heirs and assigns, or James A. Ridley, his heirs, successors, and assigns, shall have the right to enforce the terms of this declaration by proceedings of law or in equity, and shall have any and all remedies available. So I think what they have done is, with these restrictions, as we had discussed with him, they put Mr. Ridley and his heirs, his family, and future owners of the property in a position where they can enforce these restrictions, and they can amend them, and Mr. Alsop can't.
So they have clear standing to be able to enforce them.
And I believe they'll be willing to give me a copy of these, and I will be glad to have them scanned and sent to each of you if you would like.
I guess what it really comes down to is, what the Alsops want to do with their property and their livelihood. We weigh that against what Mr. Ridley wants to do.
Them to do with their property in there. Mr. McFarland?
The only two comments I would make is, I part of the reason we're up here is I like throwing ideas out, and contrary to popular belief, we cannot discuss these items outside of the meeting with other council members. The only thing that we can do is we can talk to staff, but, if I go talk to staff about something, I'm 1/7 of the opinion of staff, or opinion of the council. Just like Mr. Line has 7 bosses, he gets 1/7 of an opinion on something. So I think it is nice to be able to have dialogue to talk about these issues, and I think that we've seen a way that we could improve. The one thing that I would hope that the restrictive covenants that's a phenomenal what you have in there, and I would hope that if we find a way in the discussions that we've talked about tonight to be able to incorporate some things like what you guys have put on this piece of property, that the applicant would be willing to come back and say, hey, that makes sense, we're not changing our property at all, we're just going to incorporate this so the city also has this, so we wouldn't be changing anything, that possibly the applicant would be willing to move forward with us and look at that as we hopefully come up with something. So with that being said, and hearing the recorded restrictive covenants and that Mr. Ridley and his heirs can change that, I move for approval with the recommendation that we, I'm sorry.
Separate.
Keep that separate.
Okay.
Mr. McFarland has moved for passage on third and final reading. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Gilly, thank you. Any other questions, comments before we call for the vote? If not, please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
No. No.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
No.
Vice Mayor Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mayor Bragg?
Aye. At this time, we'll consider for passage on third and final reading an ordinance to rezone an area located along Memorial Boulevard at West Thompson Lane to a planned residential development PRD district.
Move for passage.
Motion?
Second.
A motion is second. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mayor Bragg?
Aye. At this time, we'll consider for passage again on third and final reading an ordinance to rezone an area located along New Las Casas Highway to Highway Commercial CH District.
Move for passage on third reading.
Second.
Motion is second. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mayor Bragg?
Aye. At this time, we'll consider for passage on second reading an ordinance to rezone an area located along Memorial Boulevard north of Cedar View Drive to Highway Commercial CH District.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mayor Bragg?
Aye. At this time, we'll consider for passage on second reading an ordinance to amend Appendix A zoning, Section 24, pertaining to planned signage overlay, PS District.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mayor Bragg?
Aye. At this time, we'll consider recommendations of the city engineer as to repairs to the lake at Gateway Island, as to a contract for design of improvements to Maple Street Alley, and as to an amendment to a Tennessee Department of Transportation agreement for Joe B. Jackson Parkway extension at I-24 to US 231 South Church Street. The city's engineer, Mr. Griffith, is here. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Bragg and members of the City Council. If we could go to the computer screen. The first item I have for you tonight is is repairs to the lake at the Gateway Island. The Gateway Island Lake was completed in the spring of 2009 and remains a very popular venue for our residents, hosting events such as charity events, weddings, and receptions. The facility consists of a reception center that, and this is the actual, you can see the cursor there on the screen. It's the actual island itself consists of a reception center and a gazebo, and then we have the upper lake just to the right there on the screen. The upper smaller lake, which feeds the lower lake, which is the larger 5-acre lake, with a stream and a series of waterfalls. The lakes were actually constructed in late 2003 by using the areas as a borrow site. They were constructed as regional lakes to serve property that was owned in much of the area. Well, actually, some of the areas been purchased and has been developed, but it served as a regional detention area and regional lake for those properties. The upper lake has predominantly a soil bottom and has held water for extended periods of time. The lower lake actually consists of both a soil bottom and rock outcrops, and that portion of the lake, being mostly in the central portion of it, of the upper lake, of the lower lake, has experienced leaks over the last few years. Repair efforts have been made using limestone rock, boulders, and/or concrete, including a gunite cap over much of the central portion of the lower lake. Unfortunately, the voids continue to develop. With that in mind, the city is contracted with TTL, a geotechnical and construction materials consulting firm, to determine the cause of the dropouts of the lower lake. On the second slide here, you'll see the area that's highlighted in the red was where predominantly the rock outcrops occurred, and that was really the focus of TTL's study. The study consisted of visual observations, soundings of the gunite areas, seismic refraction of potential problem areas, and finally test trenches in areas where the seismic refraction and site observations indicated potential failures. The blue areas within the red area there is actually the areas where TTL had found some anomalies in actually under the gunite areas, and that's where they focused the predominance of their study. In short, the study indicated a highly weathered bedrock unit with deep soil seams and open seams in many of the test trenches. Floating boulders and bedrock pinnacles were also encountered in some of the test trenches. Based on the study and site observation, it appears that water losses are occurring at multiple locations within the study area due to the highly irregular bedrock soil interface as shown in TP 1 and 2. And there you see just some of the boulders that are in the central portion of the lake. And this slide there actually shows the irregular nature of the bedrock surface. Floating boulders, seams still exist within the lake, and appears to be where much of the leaking occurs or is occurring. TTL provided 4 alternatives to treat the study area in their report, which includes a 2 to 3 foot clay cap, a synthetic liner, a subsurface grouting, or dental work, which is basically void excavation, and then coming back and filling those voids up with concrete, and then the placement of a clay cap. I do have TTL's report here, and each of those are outlined there, and it's available for your review. After a review of the geologic conditions and associated cost of each alternative, staff recommends the installation of a clay liner in the central portion of the lake, generally where the rock outcroppings are present. The clay liner will be constructed after the surface materials, including the soft soils, exposed rock, and gunite are removed to provide a relatively level surface. TTL noted that failures could still occur due to the poor condition of the areas. In order to enhance the clay liner, staff recommends placement of a non-woven geotextile to help prevent continued migration of the soils into the deep crevices. In addition, we further recommend that the use of a high-density polyethylene or an HDPE grid to add structural stability to the clay liner. We've estimated the cost of the removal of surface materials and installation of the enhanced clay liner to be at approximately $350,000. Of course, the actual cost will of the project will be dependent on the subsurface conditions exposed during the excavation. The estimates completing using rates from our annual stormwater and concrete contract and materials used for the HDPE grid from a local supplier. Staff recommends the project be jointly funded by the stormwater user fee and the general fund. The general fund portion will initially come from budgetary savings or fund balance and subsequently reimbursed from the Gateway Fund by future land sales. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Young, did you have a comment? I've got.
Feral hogs, have you looked into that?
Yes, we did.
Good. I'm glad you said yes, because that helps me a little bit.
As I remember, a property owner on 96 tried that on some reflecting pond property. And I'm also reminded that one of our local residents, quite a genius, stopped the leak at Stoneman Rock Quarry by using bulk paper from the Daily News Journal scrap for a period of time, throwing it into the crack until it formed a paper mache base and stopped the Stoneman Rock Quarry from leaking in years gone by. So you can buy a lot of paper for $350,000 and throw in the lake. I'm not suggesting you do that, but that is a common problem that we have across our territory, and I know they have taken great pains to show us the latest technology in trying to stop that, and I appreciate your efforts in doing that. Are there any questions for Mr. Griffith?
Mr. Griffith, is there any guarantee that this will work? I think this may be our third try at sealing this pond. If that's is there any accountability that you go back to people and you say you said you'd fix it and it still leaks, or is this just our problem and we'll continue to pour money into the well?
With the highly weathered bedrock and as the mayor mentioned, just the karst nature of Murfreesboro, lakes are a difficult difficult problem.
Yeah, I know we tried the lake right there in front of Old Fort Park Golf Course along Old Fort Parkway, and ultimately I think we wound up giving up on it and scraping it out too. But
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
We were successful on the, I believe, hole number 1 on Old Fort, on the golf course there, doing a similar method, not to the degree that we're doing on this. That's the reason why I wanted to use the HDPE grid. I think that would bridge in some dropouts that we're currently experiencing, and also the non-woven fabric would help stop some of the migration of the soil. Probably what the consultant described as the dental work, going in and actually excavating around all those boulders and filling the excavation in with concrete, and then coming back with a clay cap over all of it. That's probably the most assured method, but you could very easily be reaching $750,000 to $1 million with that type. So I think this is a feasible approach. I think certainly for the funds that we're looking at, I think the facility itself is very, very popular. Matter of fact, that's one of the problems that we're having, is just having time to work on it because it's just scheduled. We had a break here in the winter and have a break up into the 1st of March, and then the next use is actually towards the end of March. But I think that after our enhancements to what the consultant, I feel comfortable recommending this for the cost that we're spending.
That's an excellent question, Mr. Smotherman, and I think all of us have the same concern. And again, it goes to the territory that that we've inherited and adopted as home. And it's probably a thankless task that I certainly appreciate Mr. Griffith and the folks that have worked on it, taking it on, because you and I might look at it and say, scratch our heads and just say, I just don't think we can do anything here. It's a wonderful amenity for the area, for the neighborhood, and for our community, and I certainly think it is worth trying to do it. If it fails, then at least we tried. Any other comments or questions regarding this recommendation of the city engineer?
So how was the funding? I know we said part of the general fund and part out of stormwater. How's that?
Once we get to the end of the project, we'll split the funding between those two. As we saw with the audit a few weeks ago, we have always underspent your budget, so we believe we can pay for this out of money we don't spend otherwise in the budget. However, at the point in time where we sell future land in the gateway, we'll reimburse the general fund for this amount.
And I think that lake is also stocked with repurified water. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. So and that's been one of.
So that helps us from the stormwater standpoint.
There's multiple benefits from the pond. Mr. Smotherman and the mayor indicated the amenities with Parks and Recreation become a very popular place for events, for weddings in particular. It serves as our stormwater place in the gateway. It takes on water from the wastewater treatment plant and repurified. So there's multiple, and we used it to cap the landfill. So we've certainly gotten much benefit out of this. And when the lake was drained, I've gotten several calls, as you may have, about what's going on with the lake. When's the water going to get back in there? Because people really do enjoy it.
I think that from my standpoint, since we have our stormwater budget, our stormwater fee and funds that we have discussed before, and the excess funds and the projects that we have done out of that, I would personally like to see a little more spent out of the stormwater fund than taken out of our general fund, since that's what that fund is there for, to be able to, that's what we're using it for. It's used for the repurified water. And
took the words out of my mouth.
So it seems to me that we've got, what, 2.5 million in stormwater?
Mr. Gore's here. Is that? Here we took off. I don't have that exact figure. I do know that I had asked Mr. Gore to put together a capital improvement plan for the stormwater fund, because I know there's many drainage projects needed in our community, more than what's in that fund. But we are trying to pull together a comprehensive plan for the next 5 years about how we can best allocate that money.
Do you have an allocation model different from 50-50?
I do. I would like to amend and say 100% out of the stormwater management fund.
What about
2/3,
3-to-1 or 2/3 or something like that?
We did give, Mr. McFarland, we did give some consideration and discuss how much was appropriate from the stormwater fund, and we felt that there's more than just stormwater here, and trying to allocate the costs. That's why we came up with the 50-50. I'd be uncomfortable with 100%.
I'm just giving you my opinion. One of the reasons when we talk about the pond on number 1 at Old Fort, that as a golf commission, that we decided that we couldn't have the Dutch boy with his finger in the dam, that we were, as a golf commission, we paid to put that that repurified water in that pond. And so we made the decision that if we're paying to continually pump water into the pond that we're paying to the water and sewer department for a benefit for the water to leak out, that we just said we're not going to do that anymore. We'll just leave the pond empty. So whatever, I'm giving you my opinion that this would be a great stormwater management.
You have a comment, Ms. McGannon?
I think the council in its wisdom is going to have something less than 100%. I have some concerns because the stormwater is set up as a separate utility with rules about what its funds can be used for, and the repurified water is not stormwater for that purpose. I don't think 100% would be appropriate for the utility that is stormwater.
Maybe not 100%, but at the same time, by keeping this lake from leaking, isn't that helping to protect the stormwater, even if it doesn't go to repurified? Same we do with drainage ditches and that sort of thing?
I think we would need Mr. Gore or Mr. Huddleston to speak to that from an engineering point of view. I simply think you might want to get some more input before you finalize this, because there'll be plenty of time to pay the bill.
And I would say we're scheduling the work now so that we can get ready for the weddings that are coming up in
here's the
late
other
March.
thing, too. We're going to get reimbursed by land sales, and those are tied directly to Gateway and the amenity that is out there. So I understand your concerns.
Let's do this. If we can go ahead and approve for them to get started on the thing with the caveat that Mr. Lyons will see how, with Ms. McGannon's blessing, what else they can squeeze out of Mr. Gore, and that's fine before the bill is due. Can we do that? Yeah, that's a legal term, yeah.
And I think that there are several of us who, every time we see certain commercial property owners and visit businesses in town, that get our ear bent back consistently with how much money that they pay on their monthly bill towards the Stormwater Fund. And the question that we continually are asked is, where does that go and what does that do? So, and we even had this conversation with Mr. Lyons as we start bringing up the budget of who should oversee that Stormwater Fund. So is it water or sewer? Is it the council? Is it the city engineer who should oversee that? So that's something I think that we all will be discussing when budget time comes. But when you see a fund that was implemented and continually that balance grows and grows and grows, that is concerning on what we're doing with it. So I will take my flippant remark of 100% to zero, and move forward with the hopes that you can talk with Mr. Gore and find
We'll have further discussion about that.
That's in the form of a motion.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Motion and a second. Thank you very much. Please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. McFarland?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington? Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mayor Bragg?
Aye.
Second item tonight is the contract for design of improvements to the Maple Street Alley. The Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department upgraded their existing water line in the Maple Street Alley in the summer of 2009. I apologize, I didn't include a location map, but it's actually the section of the alley between Vine Street and Main Street behind Holden's Hardware. During the construction, the damaged asphalt pavement was removed and was replaced with stone, with the proposal of replacing the asphalt surface to the disturbed area. After discussions with the adjacent property owners, staff investigated the possibility of relocating some of the existing overhead utilities to underground in order to improve the aesthetics of the area. In addition, several of the owners also noted that stormwater had entered in their buildings during heavy rain events, and staff began evaluating alternatives to prevent these occurrences. Consequently, we've requested and received a proposal from Huddleston Steel Engineering to design improvements to the Maple Street Alley, including enhancements to both the drainage system and the utility facilities. A copy of the proposal has been attached. The design and reconstruction of the Maple Street Alley was included in the 2012 Capital Improvement Plan, and Huddleston Steel proposes to perform the design at the proposed billing rates with the total not to exceed $20,000. We recommend approval of the contract with Huddleston.
Does the city own that alley?
We do now. It's actually Mr. Ives was successful in getting that turned over either as right-of-way, actual right-of-way, or access easements. I'm not sure. It shows up on our GIS system as right-of-way.
And it goes to the structures that are on?
No, it's actually just a section. I believe it's a 20-foot wide section that goes. It's a consistent through that area.
Would you intend to make it impervious?
We do. My intent is to actually once we get the utilities underground. There's a couple of poles back there that's got just probably 10 or 15 lines hanging on them. Once we work with MED and get those underground, actually to go with an inverted concrete section where it would drain away from the buildings into the center of the alley, and then use porous pavers down the middle of the alley to be able to control the stormwater.
I hear stormwater.
I heard stormwater.
Can we get Mr. Board paid for this too?
All right, you have this recommendation. Are there other questions regarding this contract for the design of improvements to the Maple Street alley? Mr. Washington.
Chris, is that the phone and cable?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it'll be everything, so we can pull. It's only a couple of poles left. Recent development in there is taking out some of it, but there's still a couple that has quite a bit.
Oh, okay.
Other questions?
Move for approval if not, Mayor.
Mr. Gilly?
Second.
Mr. Young, thank you. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye.
The final item I have tonight is amendment to the TDOT agreement for Joe B. Jackson Extension I-24 to US 231 South. The City Council has previously approved a contract with TDOT on March 3rd of 2005 to jointly fund improvements to Joe B. Jackson. This project is also partially funded by Rutherford County by separate agreement. Staff has recently opened bids for the project and is currently evaluating them with the state. We will provide a recommendation to award in the next few weeks. The attached amendment basically just modifies the completion date of the project to December 31st of 2016. The amendment does not change the proposed funding for the project. Currently, TDOT's portion of the project is $2 million, with the remaining portion to be split equally between the city and the county. We recommend approval of the amendment to the contract with TDOT for the Joe B. Jackson Parkway extension. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for the city's engineer? There are no questions.
Move for approval.
Second. Thank you. Motion second. Please call the roll, Ms. Wright.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Griffith. You, along with all our department heads, are an invaluable resource in dealing with all our employees and taking care of our city, and we appreciate it.
We will have signs walking around the island out there that will say, "Stop that leak."
I'm going to go throw newspapers in it.
I'm bringing hogs.
They'll eat the newspaper. Consider recommendations of the city manager with regards to leadership team progress updates. Mr. Lyons.
Thank you, Mayor Bragg, members of council. We wanted to begin a process this evening of telling you about the work that we did at our staff retreat this fall. This was an opportunity for staff to talk about some things, big picture things for the city. And so what I want to do tonight is begin a process where we will, on a regular basis, come report back to you the things that we're working on. One of the things we talked about were what were some of the values that we felt were important to our organization, and I set forth some expectations for our city, for our city departments, and asked teams of our department heads, leadership teams, to begin to put some meat on the bone. So I want to begin by showing you a quick video produced by City TV.
And we're ready, Willie. No deltas.
Go with throttle up.
Houston, Atlantis, rolling program.
Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Go engine Zaragoza 104.
City TV always does such a great job, and Mr. Crumley can tell you the name of that song. I did not know what it was, but he can name it.
2001 Space Odyssey.
That's not
What you saw there were the values that our staff identified as things we felt were important. Important to us as we hire employees, important to us as we promote employees, important to us as we begin to deliver services to our residents. We know our employees are great and they do a great job, and part of our challenge to them was to continue to be great. And how do we do that? So I challenged our department heads and set forth some expectations. I asked them that they needed to lead their teams inclusively. We talked about the importance of sharing information generously. We talked about the need to empower our employees. And we also talked about focusing on performance and focusing on excellence. So each of our department heads joined a leadership team, and they took those concepts and began to say, how can we as an organization begin to deliver this in a consistent manner and really a focused manner. So this evening we'd like to have each of these teams start to report out to you. So we're going to lead off with Shannon Logan and Robert Holtz, who are on the Focus on the Customer team.
Good evening, council members and Mr. Mayor. My name is Robert Holtz. I'm the Deputy Director for the Building and Codes Department. As Mr. Lyons said, I am on the Focus on the Customer Committee, which was formed out of this retreat. The committee was designed to find ways that we could encourage, give direction to employees on how to better serve our customers, the citizens of Murfreesboro, and those coming from outside the city to do business here. The other team members were Rick Tippleton, Director of the Street Department, Vicki Ordinance from she's the Chief Court Clerk, Jim Callow, Community Development Director, and Shannon Logan, Service Excellence Coordinator. Our team has met several times in the last 4 to 5 months. Had a lot of great ideas come up. One of the ideas we had to present to y'all tonight was what we call customer service principles. And I'm going to bring these up to you, or bring these out to you right now. But how we came up with this was how we think city staff guidelines, principles on how to deal with customers that come in. We went to different city websites, state websites, county websites. This is nothing new. We looked at what they came up with. We created a very long list. Through some meetings after that, we shortened the list to what I'm fixing to present to you. We tried to keep it short so that it would be easily remembered. So I'm going to present these to you now. We believe our customers should be treated with courtesy and respect. We believe our customers should receive service from knowledgeable, competent, and cooperative staff who will look for creative and consistent solutions. We believe our customers should receive prompt and accurate information and feedback, have defined processes that are open and clearly articulated. As we went through this process, we also decided that it would be a good idea to maybe have some principles on how customers and citizens should maybe do business with us. So we've come up with, we believe employees should be treated with courtesy and respect, likewise. Receive support from their supervisors and work team when we're at the front counter making decisions, and sometimes things just aren't totally black and white. We need to know that our supervisor is going to support in whatever decisions we make. We want to be empowered to make decisions, be creative and consistent in solution processes, receive and give appropriate acknowledgement for our efforts, and receive the appropriate tools, training needed to do for our job performance. Shannon is going to present the another idea that this committee's come up with, but if y'all have any questions for me, I'll be glad to answer them or step out of the way and let Shannon have it.
Any questions for Mr. Holtz? Thank you, Mr. Holtz, for participating and for bringing that message to us. Ms. Logan, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Continuing on from Mr. Holtz, as he said, is after we went through developing the customer service principles, and something that we would like to make sure was emblazoned throughout our community, was that we looked at the idea of the Citizens Academy, which was started recently. And we actually came up with this idea before we started the Citizens Academy, but it was during that same time of the process of that. And we decided that it would be good to modify the Citizens Academy into an employee academy. And what we wanted to do with that was to take elements from the Citizens Academy and design it in such a way that our frontline employees would have access to some of the same information that our citizens are learning through the Citizens Academy. One of the things that sometimes is difficult is that if you only work in one department and you don't always have the ability to interact with others outside of your department, and you get questions or comments concerning things in the city, if you're not familiar with what some of your other departments do, you're not always able to direct the customer appropriately or even respond to them in an appropriate manner. And so we have formulated an idea that would allow for a 4-week session where we would send our frontline employees, those who deal with the public the most, to other departments to learn specifics about those departments. And it wouldn't probably have the fun level that the Citizens Academy has in terms of some of those things. It would be more detail-oriented. But we would want to show our employees that we feel that they're an investment and that they are our best asset, and we want to make sure that they're aware of everything else that's going on within the city. We also looked at doing this as an online version. We would like to find a way to not only provide this to employees in a physical setting, but also put this online where more employees would have access to it. And we're moving more and more into what I would call distance learning systems or online learning systems for training for our employees. And we feel that this would be an opportunity to try to explore that. But we really wanted to move forward with our Employee Academy as part of one of our other goals of our team. We also have identified our next steps and projects for our team. The first one is we need to come up with a standardized method to measure and track our customer service performance. Currently, we don't really have any standardized way of seeing how we're doing on a customer service level. We would all like to think, I hope, that we provide good service to our customers. However, without some type of measurement feedback, we're not always sure that we're doing that. And while we may be courteous or kind or responsive, are we actually addressing their needs? There's lots of questions that come up as part of customer service. It's not always just being nice or answering their question. It's, are we being efficient in answering that question? Are we answering the question that they asked? Are we going above and beyond and providing them the services that they need as citizens? And so that is our next step, is trying to find a way that we measure our customer service. And there may be a way that we can measure it in a generalized manner without using the same type of measurement tool. And what I mean by that is that we need to aggregate our information, but what may work for a tool for measuring customer service performance at the Parks and Recreation Department may not be the best tool to measure customer service at our police department. And so we would like to formulate a way that we can do that and not only look at our 22 different, what I would consider almost separate organizations sometimes within this conglomerate of our city, but find a way to aggregate that measurement into one standardization so that everybody can understand it and we use it simply, and then go and change our performance based upon that. Our second project is finding a way to continue to create a culture of service with our citizens. Our Citizens Academy is really our first attempt at what I would consider direct governance or citizen governance, where we have one-on-one interaction with our citizens. What we're finding through that process is that sometimes they ask questions, they see things, they have, not always sure about how we do things, and they may formulate those beliefs on that. And so from that, we thought, well, we should try to look at creating a focus group. And a focus group would require that we have a specialized mediator who knows how to utilize focus groups and actually get information from them. We've utilized focus groups in the city for other situations, but get a focus group together that is citizen-based to discuss with them what is it that we are doing good from a customer service level and where are areas that we could improve. And we need to be able to step back a little bit and not be too sensitive and wear our feelings on our sleeve and be open to some of the things that may come from the citizens group and look at areas that we can improve. And we may actually find, too, that things that sometimes we think, well, we're not as good at doing that as we ought to be, our customers think that we're doing it outstanding. I think sometimes we sell ourselves short and we don't always know just how good a job we're trying to do for our citizens and our customers until we have the opportunity to get their direct feedback. And so we'd like to do that through a citizen-based focus group. Finally, we'd like to look at technology solutions to improve our customers' experience with the City of Murfreesboro. And Mr. Lilly, that will be up here after me for his presentation, will provide you additional information on what some of the cool ideas that his team have come up with about sharing information. But we want to look at maybe even doing some lean processes where we look at process simplification, how we're communicating with each other, and finally improving our internal customer service skills. We think with our intranet that Mr. Lilly will be presenting to you that we have an opportunity there to improve our communication among departments and improve our internal customer service skills and hopefully empower our employees to make the decisions that we ask them to do every day. So that concludes our presentation, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Logan. Any questions or comments regarding these activities? I certainly think they're positive, and I think our residents and business owners will appreciate the efforts that we're making, and look forward to some future updates where we can find out where we're going, where we've been, and maybe make some further improvements. Any other questions or comments?
Very good report.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons.
Yeah, Mayor, several years ago, you all talked to us and said customer service was important, and we heard that message, and we built our budget around it, and that's why we've got one of the work teams focused on customer service as a follow-up to the hard work that Shannon's doing with our city employees. They do a great job, and we continue to want to try to get better.
I agree. Beer permits, Ms. Wright.
We got Mr. Lilly just yet. We got one more quick
more
report.
to go. Thank you.
Got one more. As you'll see, as we do give our updates from the leadership retreat, you'll see an alignment because we have learned that we need to focus on our goals, and Mr. Lyons has given us some marching orders. We're going to talk about that briefly and talk about how we can share information generously. On September 13, 2012, Rob Lyons put a stake in the ground. That's Mr. Lyons up there planting that stake with his 5 expectations that would enable us to go from good to great. We talked about a concept. One of the concepts we talked about was the Hedgehog Concept. In the Hedgehog Concept, as you see a quote from Archaeologius up here, he's an old poet. He talks about the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows but one thing. In this story, the fox was planning to eat the hedgehog. The fox had many ideas. He was a jack of all trades, master of none. He could think of many ways to approach the hedgehog, but all the hedgehog knew was survival, rolling the ball and survive. With that being said, with that one detail or that one focus, the hedgehog was able to be successful in what he did, and that was survive by avoiding all the attempts from the fox. Using that concept of the hedgehog, we can take many ideas, align them, and bring them into one. And again, the goal is to achieve greatness. How do we apply that to our business? Hedgehog concept. Where's the hedgehog? We can use 3 different methods, 3 different facts. And as they mesh right there in the middle, our passions, our skills, and our resources, right in the middle of all that, in that vortex, we find the hedgehog. So what we like to do in all these methods is to take those passions and the skills, what we know how to do, and the resources that we have, and align them into find that hedgehog, find out what we do, aligning that and doing that well. As Rob took the helm with his discussion of the 5 expectations, we began to unify our direction and new ideas began to fill the room. Leadership teams were formed to focus on these ideas and support each of the expectations. 5 expectations were to lead inclusively, empower our employees, share information generously, focus on the customer, focus on performance. I'll be talking with you tonight about sharing information generously. In this focus group, we had 16 members: Alan Bozeman, Chris Griffith, Melissa Wright, Jack Hyatt, Cynthia Holloway, and yours truly. Sharing information generously, we came up with 7 ideas. I'll briefly discuss those ideas with you. Idea number 1, the goal was to improve interest and readership of our newsletter. What we wanted to, the idea was to improve the communication in the newsletter. We wanted to reach out to our employees and survey our employees to find out what they actually wanted to read, what was important to them. So we've been having meetings on how to approach our employees, on how to get that feedback back to the group and back to those that create the newsletter, so that we can put more focus on and increase the readership of our newsletter. Idea number 2, the goal was to share up-to-date information on video screens in our high-traffic areas. We want to share this information generously. One of the ideas was an installation of an informational kiosk in our public areas, one being downstairs, first level in our rotunda area. Share some of the information that we know we do, that we celebrate, and so that when our residents come through City Hall, that they will leave City Hall knowing more about what goes on within the city. Number 3, goal was to improve design and effectiveness of our city website. The approach was to contract with Civic Plus in creating, building, and maintaining a more user-friendly and more information-based website. That is in the works right now, scheduled for a completion date of May 23rd. Number 4, the goal is to build a solution to help us to communicate and share information throughout the city with our employees. The idea is to create an intranet, which is an internal website, so that we can share information, we can communicate, we can share documents, do our revisions, all interactively and dynamically, so that we can work together as one on even the smallest of tasks without a lot of complexity or actually printing out and trying to push paper around. So we want to make it easier for our employees to share information. Idea number 5, the goal was to create the ability for our employees to request newsletters via e-delivery or electronic delivery to any requested email address. We do realize that some of our employees out in the field, and they don't have access to a city computer at all times, but they do want to see the newsletter. So what we'd like to do is make it convenient for them. If they want to subscribe to the newsletter and maybe use a personal email account, we want to make it to where they can access or receive the newsletter, receive updates from their other email accounts. Idea number 5, the goal was to increase communication and information shared with our residents. The idea is better use of our social media. Right now, all the buzz is about Facebook and tweeting on Twitter and using YouTube. And what we did realize is that we are using that. We do, as a matter of fact, we've collected some of the avenues that we're using through social media, and we're using over, I think it was 11 or 12 different accounts where we share information, which brings me to this, the seventh idea. Gather and advertise all external social media used by city departments. And that's something that we're doing. We've gathered the information, and what we want to do is advertise. Some of the social media that we're using is some of our best kept secrets. We want to get that out, make sure that everyone knows that we're using those avenues to share information. So what we're looking at is, with the rollout of our new website in May, we're looking at pushing those Facebook accounts, those groups, those Twitter accounts, and those YouTubes to the front of our website so that we can share those with our residents. There was a special project that came up as we started to synergize with these different groups. On October 22nd, the Empower Our Employees and the Share Information Generously teams met with Jim and Rob on how to best communicate the vision, mission, and values adopted by leadership at the retreat. Solution. Rob and the Communications Department will create monthly videos and posters that will communicate the vision, mission, and 5 values adopted from the leadership retreat. Each department will use these resources to share the mission, vision, and values to all employees of the city. Then lastly, I put up here continuous improvement. What we realized out of this retreat is that greatness is not a destination, it's a direction. And what we have to do is work on continuously improving so that we can move toward not being great, but greatness, so that we can continue to be great. So in these areas, in these focus groups that we're using, what we realize is it's not a project that will have an ending, but it'll be a project that will continuously go. I have a little cartoon up here of Leonardo da Vinci. He's painted the Mona Lisa, and he says, yes, it's brilliant, but the next one will be even better. Even as we become great, we know that we'll have to continuously improve so that we can become greater. And lastly, this is to be continued. Any questions?
Questions for Mr. Lilly? Comments? You certainly have made a difference since you've been with us, Mr. Lilly. I know you're going to be busy traveling to Berry College to see your son play football. Are you going to have time to continue to do all this?
Oh, yes.
Certainly look forward to the day he's drafted and you get your house paid for. Thank you, Mr. Lilly. It's an excellent start, and we're looking forward to the results, I know, just as you are. All right, now, Ms. Wright, would you like to give us the beer permits?
Mayor, we have 2 tonight. We have a new restaurant coming in on West Main Street. This restaurant is going to take the place of the old Three Brothers, which is moving out. And I want to clarify on the address of this restaurant. I have listed on this application as 219, 223. The planning department, in particular Matthew Blomley, is working with the assessor's office to do away with address 221, which is in between these. It's where the building used to be 2 buildings, and it's become 1, but it still shows as 3 addresses with the lot next door at the assessor's office. Under the assumption that he will be successful, then we'll use 219 for the lot and 223 for the building for this address, for this location, to show that it covers both locations. If he's not successful, then when we actually issue the permit, we will add in the additional address that is just part of the building. It's not an actual separate parcel or property. This is obviously an ownership change and a name change, and it's lacking building codes inspections, but everything else so far has met our conditions for approval. And then we also have an ownership change taking place for a restaurant at 2021 South Church Street, and it also is lacking the final building codes inspections, but the rest of the permit application's been completed to meet our recommendations for approval once the codes inspections are done.
All right, you've heard about these beer permit applications. They all seem to meet our requirements. Is there a motion that we accept?
So moved.
All right, thank you, Mr. McFarland. And Mr. Young, I'll give you the second. Would that be all right?
Fine.
All right.
I don't know. Let me think about
I'll take the second. That's fine.
Mr. McFarland, you before age. You will take the motion, and Mr. Young is the second. All right.
Let me think about that.
Thank you. Please call the roll regarding the beer permits.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. This time you have before you the statements to be considered for payment. Are there any questions regarding any of those bills, or is there a motion to pay the bills?
Move that we pay the bills.
Second.
Thank you. Motion and second. Please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Regarding appointments to boards and commissions, I'd like to reappoint Mr. Tony Ogles and Mr. Buddy Follis to the Board of Electrical Examiners. And I would like to appoint Mr. Whit Turnbow to the Golf Commission, replacing Chris Massaro. I make these recommendations to you.
Mayor, I move we accept your recommendations.
Second.
Thank you. Motion and second. Please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Other business from staff to come before the council at this time? Anything else before the council?
Would now be the time to request Ms. McGannon and Mr. Adelot to research our discussion on zoning from tonight.
Certainly.
I would like to make a motion. Would you like a motion, Ms. McGannon, or just?
I think an expression of consensus
Okay.
from the council is
I'm-
sufficient.
I think we were expressing earlier.
You have your directive.
We understand.
All right. Anything else?
Mayor, I would like for
Mr. Gilly.
all just to keep Chris Schaffner and his family in our thoughts and prayers, given his medical condition right now.
Certainly. All right. Anything else? If not, you're adjourned.
How is Chris doing this?